Chris Bowman transmission again here, working on this 480E. It's out of a 2000 truck with a 6-liter. This transmission was previously built before me, and it obviously wasn't installed very well. I'm going to assume that this transmission was not installed by a pro, because there were many things wrong with it. The Prindle switch on the side of the transmission was completely loose. The bell housing bolts were missing. A few of them were missing. There was a transfer case that was loose. There was just a lot of things wrong that I just hope this wasn't installed by a professional, but I'm guessing it was installed by the owner or, a buddy or that kind of stuff. So this transmission came to me, many issues, one of them being the transfer case being loose. And what causes that is right here on this transfer case adapter, there's a paper gasket that goes around here, and one of the things that was causing this thing to be loose is that has all this silicone just gobbed on either sides of that gasket. The problem with doing that is that you can't use or shouldn't use RTV on a paper gasket ever. The reason being is because this RTV takes up some space and it's kind of a lubricant and allows a little bit of movement and wiggle. Well, what happens is that it tears up this paper gasket because it allows that little bit of movement, and then that RTV spits out and gets wore out, and then all of a sudden this gasket's loose because that RTV was in there. So the proper way to put in these paper gaskets, whether it's a GM, Ford, Dodge, Jeep, anything with a paper gasket, is to do it completely clean and dry. Scrape everything off nice and clean, get it all good to go. Don't use like the 3M discs on it, because all that does is polish this material, and you don't want this to be polished. In fact, when you're scraping with a razor blade, a little bit of those scratch marks and stuff actually don't really hurt it as long as they're not deep, because what those do is they allow them to grab that paper and hold that paper into place. But I don't like using, I almost will never use a 3M disc or those old Scotch-Brite discs on things, because they just polish the surface instead of giving it a good spot for a gasket to seat. But yeah, clean and dry. Some things you have to put in these paper gaskets and you can't get them to hold into place while you're assembling. And on those, I'll use a high-tack gasket spray, and those work really well. And you spray both sides, spray the mating surface, let it dry a little bit, and then you can stick it to it and then you can assemble. And that stuff is completely fine to use on paper gasket, but RTV is never a good idea on paper gaskets. So don't use them, don't do it, don't be tempted, because it will cause you issues. I see a lot of these that come in and are damaged that way because somebody gooped it up. They thought they were doing a really good job and being super amazing with all this, super extra sealing. But this is a case, saying goes, bigger the blob, better the job. And obviously that never works out. And I'll show you this transfer case over here. So this transfer case over here, you can see all of this RTV right here. But if you can look at, there's a step right here where that aluminum or this magnesium is completely wore down. See this lip? This little bitty fine razor sharp lip right here on the inside? That is where the aluminum used to be, or the magnesium used to be. It has actually sat here and wiggled loose for so long that it's actually completely wore that face apart. And so we'll go back to this transmission now and what was wrong with it. So this transmission came in overheated, burnt, smoked, tons of crap in the pan. First I thought maybe it was one of my transmissions because it's got an orange pan and black housing, but as it turns out, definitely was not one of mine. There's a few things in the build stack and things that I don't do. Wasn't anything wrong as far as that goes, but I just noticed there were some things that I don't do. So definitely not one of mine, which I'm happy to see, because I don't like seeing my transmissions back. But a couple of things that I found. So I started to tear this apart. And one of the things I found in this transmission is that this bushing right here in this pump is walked out. Now this is supposed to be a bronze colored bushing with it's steel backed and everything. It is not supposed to be walked out of this bore, and it is completely walked out of this bore. And why is that? Well, it's because this thing got lack of lube and got hot and started sticking to the input shaft, and it just walked itself right out of this bore. So damage number one on the pump. damage number 2 on the pump. This outside surface right here is where the overrun drum rides on, and the bushing on it is completely wore this out. Now it looks good, it looks usable, but I guarantee this is going to be a smaller surface because it's wore down. Next thing is go down to these sealing rings, and all of this material, the steel on this cast iron, this pump's been rolled back and it's all sharp and has an edge on it. And the reason that's being is because all this stuff was not held concentric anymore because the bushings were all worn. And so this drum was just sitting here beating it to death. And it actually beat it to death so much that it actually staked the sealing rings into the bores. So now they can no longer expand and come out into the drum. So this is a dead leak now right here because this drum has been beaten around and smashed those sealing rings in. So that was another problem here. So here's the next one. See all this discoloration right here? And there's a rolled edge right here, or a sharp edge. And that is because the overdrive or the overrun drum was sitting in here wearing and eating against the pump. And the reason that is because there's supposed to be a thrust washer right here, but because this thing got so hot and lacked oil and everything else, this thrust washer was actually broken. Now it could have been that this thrust washer got broken on assembly and cracked in half, but I'd be more inclined to believe that it's a lubrication issue that's caused all this. But yeah, all this wear right here, not normal. This is from the drum machining itself against it. So huge amount of damage right here, and just overheated in here. So we'll move on to the next thing, which is this overdrive. So this is the overdrive drum hub right here. Overdrive clutches go on here, and inside here is your overrun clutches. Now you can see all of this heat and discoloration and all of this galling. This is where it was machining itself against the pump. And then this is the bushing down here that rides on the outside of that pump, and it is completely, smushed around, melted, everything else. So yeah, well, that's nice. A little chunk of metal just fell out right there. So looking at this, you can see a huge amount of heat in here. These clutches are completely smoked, and these clutches are smoked because those sealing rings were smashed into the bores. So looking at this, planetary gears actually don't look too hot, but look like they would have been usable and okay if for the fact that, well, this is supposed to be multiple pieces with clutch and piston and a sprag and everything else. And a planetary, this is not supposed to be welded together in one solid piece, and it is. And you see all the heat and discoloration in there. So then I started looking around again, and this is the rest of the transmission. Nothing's overly hot or anything. A little bit of heat marking there, but nothing really that bad. Just a little bit of hot oil banging around there. But everything else, man, everything else just really came out looking good. I mean, rear planet assembly and stuff, all was in nice shape. The center support was done right. It was the right center support for the center lube style transmission. And then we come back to what I figured it was going to happen. So a little backstory here. This transmission, originally when a 4L80E was made, was from 91 to 96, used a front lube style transmission. And what it did is it had the cooler port came out here, and then it came back in here and went into the pump and into the case, and it actually went into the case right here where there's nothing drilled now because it's not drilled on the outside either. And it went in there, and then it went into the pump and then came out into the valve body area in this right here port, and then lubed everything, and also lubed the front section of the overdrive assembly. That worked out fine for a couple years, and then in 97 they switched it up and they went to a center lube assembly, which is a better deal because it distributes the oil a little bit better throughout everything. But both of them really work fine as long as the trans is built correctly and everything. Either lube section or style is really fine. So in these ones, instead of coming back and returning here, they come back into the center here, and then they lube everything. So I know cooler flow was coming out here, and I know it was going in here, and then it continues to go into here and then lubes the entire thing, or the entire gear train, because all this stuff looked in really good shape, but yet the front was completely burnt. So if this cooler oil was coming back hot, all this stuff would look hot too and have a lot of heat marks. So coming back to this, so the reason that all of this overdrive assembly right here was completely starved for oil was because whoever built this transmission used a 91 to 96 pump. And what that does, if you use a 91 to 96 pump in a late model case, or vice versa, you will starve. And if you use a early pump, and a late pump in an early case, you will starve this whole gear train, but you will feed the overdrive gear train with oil. If you flip-flop it the other way, you completely starve the overdrive, but it feeds all this stuff just fine. So this thing was completely starving that overdrive, so the entire time this transmission was working was not getting anything but some splash lubrication here and there, but was not getting lubed, which is why everything burnt up. And the reason I know this is a 91 to 96 pump is that in 97, they cast a dam, or a little wall, right across this port right here. And what it did is it separated off the oil, and then they added a small little channel between this port and this port that allowed for it to still have lubrication to the front half of that transmission, to the overdrive assembly. When you use this pump and it doesn't have the wall and this lubrication port right here, and you're using it on a late model transmission, there is no oil coming back into here. So no oil flows into that overdrive assembly. So problem number one right here, they used the wrong pump. It's kind of ridiculous. I know they had this pump apart because I can see that they changed out the boost valve for a newer style boost valve, which is awesome, had they only done this. Another thing that I usually like to see as well too, that I don't see in this one, is typically you're going to drill a hole through this port right here, and it's going to allow full throttle cooler flow, which is something that happens. These things will steal cooler volume, or cooler flow at full throttle, or high PR loads, pressure regulator loads. So that's not super critical to do, but it's really a good thing to do on all these. So that one hasn't been done, which is kind of crazy that they did some of the mods but not all the mods. But man, if they'd only used the right pump and paid attention, they wouldn't have burnt this up. Now that I said that, so see this slot right here? There's a mating slot right here. See how this one has the dam on the pump mating face? In the 91 and 96, this is completely open all the way across. Now, when they came up with 97, it came into this, or when they went to 97, they went with this style pump face, which had to have the dam to match the pump on this side. That being said, the pump covers work on everything. So you can use this style pump on a 97 or on a 96, or this style pump cover on a 96 pump, but you cannot use the 96 or the 97 or 96 base on a 97. So kind of a little bit confusing, but most aftermarket, this is an aftermarket replacement, and all the aftermarkets come looking like this, and it's fine to use on either the early or the late as long as it has this dam. So yeah, here's another transmission burnt completely up. Why? Because the shop just didn't pay attention. I don't know if they just don't care, didn't know, but there are 3 versions of this pump, and depending on how you use the last 2 versions, they can be used on any of the late models. You do have to do some plugging or some different things, but only the 91 to 96 can be used in a 91 to 96, and then 97 up you can use pretty much in anything 97 up, as long as you know to plug the port if it has it early or late. Kind of confusing. I know there's a lot of stuff that changes on these with the 97 up center lube mods, but it really is worthwhile to do your homework and do all this stuff and assemble it right. Otherwise you're back on my bench here. I mean, this transmission was built, looked like a decent build. I mean, there's some things I would do better, but for the most part, it looked like a pretty decent build, except that one little mistake right there destroyed everything. Well, that and the fact that the transfer case was let loose, so this thing was leaking all of its oil out everywhere. So those 2 issues right there, but that was caused by an installation issue, which I'm assuming wasn't a pro shop. This was caused by somebody that paid good money to have this transmission built, and it wasn't built correctly. Just is what it is. I mean, you get what you pay for, I guess. Guy's got to know his stuff in order to make these things right, and there's a lot of little things that get done to these transmissions that if you spend your time on them and spend the money on them, you can make a nice transmission. But if you're looking for the cheapest option out there, this is what you get. So anyways, have a great day. I'll be back. I'm sure it won't be long before I've got another episode of screwed up transmission repairs. But kind of fun, kind of enjoy talking to you guys about this stuff. So have a good one.